Welcome to Coaching Deep Dives, presented by the Global Coach Collective. This is where evidence-based research meets practical application. Each episode transforms scholarly articles into dynamic discussions, examining the intersection of psychodynamic theory, organizational behavior, and practical coaching applications. Whether you're a certified coach, business leader, or curious learner, you'll discover how evidence-based coaching approaches can enhance performance and drive transformation. From exploring the psychodynamics of resilience to understanding culture-centric coaching models, this podcast bridges theoretical frameworks with real-world implementation.
I'm excited about today's topic, the transformative power of silence. It's fascinating how something we often perceive as the absence of communication can actually be one of our most powerful tools in coaching and personal development.
Absolutely. What struck me immediately about this research is how it challenges our cultural bias toward constant communication. In Western societies particularly, we've developed this almost allergic reaction to silence in conversations. There's this immediate urge to fill any gap, isn't there?
That's precisely it. The article frames silence not as a void, but as a space filled with potential. I find the cross-cultural perspective particularly enlightening. How, in some traditions, silence is actually revered as a sign of wisdom and contemplation, rather than awkwardness.
I think that's what makes this research so valuable for coaches. We're constantly navigating these subtle dynamics with clients. The article points to something I've experienced repeatedly in my practice. That breakthrough moments often emerge from those spaces where I've resisted the urge to jump in with another question or observation.
That requires tremendous discipline, doesn't it? There's that wonderful quote from Lao Tzu cited in the article. Silence is a source of great strength. In my experience, embracing silence in coaching sessions is actually a practice that develops over time. It's almost counterintuitive to how we're socialized.
It absolutely requires practice. I'm reminded of research in neuroscience that shows how silence activates different neural pathways than verbal processing. When we allow for those quiet moments, we're essentially giving the client's brain time to form new connections and insights. The article touches on this when discussing self-development through intentional silence.
That's a fascinating connection. The research also presents this concept of a vow of silence as a developmental tool. While the full monastic version might be impractical for most people, I've had clients experiment with shorter periods of intentional silence with remarkable results. One executive I worked with began implementing just 30 minutes of silent reflection each morning and reported significant improvements in decision-making clarity.
I've had similar experiences with clients. What's particularly interesting is how this practice connects to mindfulness traditions. The article suggests several practical exercises: silent walks, mindful eating, timed periods of silence, that essentially function as mindfulness practices without necessarily framing them that way. This creates accessibility for clients who might otherwise resist more explicitly meditative approaches.
Excellent point. These practices create what psychological researchers call cognitive space, essentially room for reflection rather than reaction. I'm particularly interested in how the article connects silence to self-control. There's substantial evidence that the pause between stimulus and response is where our growth potential lies.
That reminds me of Viktor Frankl's famous observation that between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. When coaches model comfortable silence, we're essentially helping clients expand that space of choice.
Precisely. And the research indicates this has neurological foundations. Studies on emotional regulation show that the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, becomes more active during moments of reflective silence, while the amygdala, which drives reactivity, becomes less dominant. So when we create silence in coaching conversations, we're literally helping clients engage their higher cognitive functions.
That's fascinating. The article also explores silence as a tool for enhanced listening. I think this is where coaches often struggle most, truly listening rather than mentally preparing the next brilliant question.
Absolutely. There's research from the field of communication studies suggesting that we typically remember only about 25 to 50% of what we hear. because we're so busy formulating our response. By embracing silence, we dramatically increase our capacity to absorb and process what clients are actually saying rather than what we think they're saying.
The article frames this as creating a listening platform for clients. I love that image. It suggests we're constructing something solid and supportive through our silence, not just being passive.
That's a powerful reframe. It reminds me that silence is active, not passive. When we're truly present in silence, we're fully engaged, observing nonverbal cues, processing emotional undertones, connecting disparate threads in the client's narrative. The research highlights how this quality of attention creates psychological safety for clients.
This connects to attachment theory in psychology, doesn't it? When clients experience that consistent, attentive presence, even in silence, it creates a secure base from which they can explore challenging topics and emotions.
Exactly right. And the neurobiological research on co regulation supports this. When a coach maintains calm, attentive silence, it actually helps regulate the client's nervous system, moving them from potential fight or flight responses toward a more reflective state where insight becomes possible.
I'm curious about your experiences with cross-cultural dimensions of silence. The article mentions how silence is perceived differently across cultures, which can create misunderstandings. How do you navigate that in your coaching practice?
That's such an important consideration. I work with executives from various cultural backgrounds, and I've found it essential to discuss expectations around communication styles early in the coaching relationship. In some East Asian contexts, for instance, silence often indicates thoughtful consideration rather than discomfort or disagreement. By contrast, many Western clients initially interpret silence as awkward or even confrontational.
Have you found specific approaches that help bridge these differences?
What's worked best for me is being explicit about the purpose and value of silence in our coaching conversations. I might say something like, I want to give you space to fully process that question, so I'm comfortable sitting in silence while you gather your thoughts. This helps normalize silence regardless of cultural background and positions it as intentional rather than accidental.
That's excellent. The research also discusses silence as a tool for breakthroughs in coaching. There's that tension between allowing enough space for insights to emerge organically versus providing structure and guidance.
It's a delicate balance. The neuroscience here is interesting. Creativity and insight often require what researchers call default mode network activation, which happens when we stop actively focusing on problems and allow our minds to wander. Silence creates conditions for that network to activate, which is why clients often have their aha moments during pauses in conversation.
This reminds me of research on incubation and creative problem solving, how stepping away from active engagement with a problem often leads to unexpected solutions. By cultivating comfortable silence, coaches essentially create mini incubation periods within the coaching session itself.
Exactly. And what's particularly valuable about the article is how it connects these theoretical frameworks to practical application. Those exercises for incorporating silence, whether it's timed periods, silent walks, mindful eating, can be directly implemented in coaching plans.
I've found journaling after periods of silence to be particularly powerful with clients. The article mentions this briefly, but I think it deserves more attention. That combination of silence for processing, followed by written reflection, creates a powerful cycle of insight generation and integration.
That's an excellent point. There's research showing that writing activates different cognitive pathways than verbal processing, so combining silent reflection with journaling essentially engages multiple learning modalities. This can significantly enhance insight retention and application.
I'm also struck by how the article frames silence as a relationship building tool. In our hyper-connected world, creating space for authentic presence through silence might be one of the most valuable gifts we can offer clients.
Absolutely. The quality of attention we bring to coaching relationships is fundamental to their effectiveness. Research on therapeutic alliance, which applies equally to coaching relationships, consistently shows that the perception of being truly heard and understood is one of the strongest predictors of positive outcomes.
And silence, paradoxically, might be one of our most powerful tools for creating that sense of being heard. When we resist the urge to immediately respond or redirect, we communicate profound respect for the client's own process and wisdom.
This connects to self-determination theory in psychology. The idea that autonomy, competence, and relatedness are fundamental human needs. When coaches create space through silence, they honor the client's autonomy and innate capacity for growth.
That's such an important framework. I'm curious about your thoughts on how technology impacts our relationship with silence. The article doesn't address this explicitly, but in a world of constant notifications and stimulation, the capacity for comfortable silence seems increasingly rare.
That's a critical observation. Research on attention fragmentation shows that our average attention span has declined significantly with the rise of digital technologies. Many clients now struggle with what psychologists call continuous partial attention, a state where they're never fully present with any single task or interaction.
From that perspective, introducing intentional silence into coaching sessions might be even more valuable now than in previous generations. We're essentially helping clients rebuild a capacity that's being systematically eroded by our digital environment.
Absolutely. And there's emerging research suggesting that this constant stimulation may be changing our neurological tolerance for silence and reflection. Some studies show increased anxiety when subjects are asked to simply sit with their thoughts without external stimulation. As coaches, we might be providing a countercultural experience by creating spaces of intentional silence.
That's fascinating. So beyond the immediate benefits for communication and insight generation, embracing silence might actually be developing a fundamental cognitive capacity that's increasingly at risk in modern life.
Exactly. And the article's suggestion to start with small periods of silence and gradually expand them aligns with how we'd approach any skill development, beginning where the client is and progressively stretching their capacity.
This has been such a rich discussion. As we wrap up, I'm curious, what's one practice related to silence that you found most transformative in your own coaching approach?
For me, it's been implementing a brief period of silence before responding to anything a client shares that seems significant. Even just 3 to 5 seconds has dramatically improved my ability to respond to what was actually said rather than my interpretation of it. It's simple but profound. How about you?
I've incorporated what I call bookend silence into my sessions, beginning and ending with 1 minute of shared silence. It creates a clear transition into and out of the coaching space and has been surprisingly powerful in establishing presence. Clients often report that these brief periods help them arrive fully and integrate their insights before returning to their day.
That's beautiful. These practices remind us that silence isn't simply the absence of speech. It's a positive force that creates space for presence, reflection, and transformation. The research we've discussed today offers both theoretical grounding and practical applications for harnessing this power in coaching relationships.
Before we close, remember to visit globalcoachcooperative.com, where you'll find the full article discussed in today's episode, additional resources on performance psychology, our complete library of coaching research and practice guides. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Coaching Deep Dives, where we transform coaching scholarship into actionable insights.